The sky hasn't been anything close to blue in a decade. It hangs low now, smothered in layers of ash and static, a bruised canvas of burnt oranges and deep reds that bleed into each other like an old wound that never healed. Some days it flickers, yes, flickers, like the world's atmosphere itself is losing power, dimming in and out in dull pulses. Scientists used to debate whether it was from the collapsing magnetosphere or the billions of airborne particulates choking the sky. But the scientists are gone, and debate doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that the world feels smaller every day. The horizon used to stretch far and wide, but now it warps in the heat, bending like a mirage on a broken screen. The one-screen belts that wrapped around cities have withered into lifeless gray plains. Trees stand like skeletal monuments, leafless and cracked, as if they're mourning everything they couldn't protect. Even the wind has changed. It comes in harsh, metallic tastes, carrying the scent of oxidized metal, burnt soil, and something else, a bitter tang of decay that never quite leaves the back of your throat. It's hard to remember what rain sounded like. Harder still to remember what it smelled like. The world has been locked in a state of permanent drought for so long that younger survivors don't even know what thunderstorms are. The rivers, lakes, oceans, all of them have receded into dusty basins or toxic froth. Shorelines now stretch for miles longer than they used to, revealing ship skeletons and rusted sea platforms that were never meant to see sunlight again. Where cities once thrived, only carcasses remain. Towers that once shimmered with glass and steel are now hollowed-out husks, their exteriors burnt or blown apart by storms powerful enough to peel concrete from their bones. Streets are cracked open, buckling upward like old scars. Cars sit frozen in place, their frames sunken into the earth or half swallowed by drifting dunes of blackened dust. The old highways, those long, flowing arteries of civilization, are now broken lines stretching into nothingness, leading nowhere except deeper into the silence. The sound of humanity is gone. No engines, no chatter. No distant hum of life. Only the deep groans of a dying planet and the occasional creaking of metal structures shifting in the unbearable heat. As for civilization, well, that word doesn't mean what it once did. Governments fell gradually at first, then all at once. The final collapse came not with war or rebellion, but with exhaustion. Systems simply failed under the weight of starvation, mass migration, and environmental death spirals. Nation by nation, they flickered out like failing signals on a radio dial, leaving behind scattered groups of people trying to keep some form of order alive. But order is expensive, and hope is even more costly. Now what's left of humanity is divided into fragments, small survivor enclaves tucked into underground bunkers or shielded basements, nomadic scavenger caravans drifting across the wasteland in rusted vehicles, raiders who hunt the weak and strip the land of anything remotely useful, scientists stern preppers who cling to the last scraps of old-world technology, hermits who wander alone, convinced that solitude is safer than community. But institutions, real, functioning institutions, they don't exist anymore. The closest thing left is scattered radio operators, lonely voices transmitting into nothingness, hoping someone out there still listens. Most of them have already gone silent. Some lost power, others lost hope. And some, well, the storms took them before anyone heard their final words. Nothing feels stable, nothing feels safe. The weather, once predictable, now behaves like an animal driven into madness. Sudden walls of dust hundreds of feet tall sweep across entire regions, swallowing everything in their path. Heat spikes rise so sharply that birds fall from the sky mid-flight. Temperatures surge from freezing to blistering within a single day, leaving even the hardiest survivors struggling to adapt. Wildfires burn with a ferocity that defies physics, flames leaping across barren land as if drawn by some unseen hunger. They don't die out naturally anymore. They don't run out of fuel. They feed on chemicals in the atmosphere, growing hotter, brighter, and more violent each year. And then there are the nights. Nights are colder than anyone expected the end of the world to be. The atmosphere thins too much after sunset, and the heat escapes too quickly. People huddle around scrap metal fires, wrapped in layers of scavenged clothes, praying that the cold doesn't seep into their bones. Praying the next morning actually arrives. Landmarks once filled with tourists or communities are now unrecognizable. The Statue of Liberty stands half buried in sediment. The Eiffel Tower lies collapsed under its own weakened metal. The Great Wall is swallowed by encroaching dunes. Everything humans built now crumbles, cracks, sinks, or burns. And here I am, broadcasting from one of the few remaining outposts with enough juice to send a signal across the wasteland. I don't know how many people are out there. I don't know if this world has room for survivors anymore, but I do know one thing: silence is the last enemy. Silence is how the world ends, so I speak, I broadcast, even into a future that might not be listening. Because as long as someone speaks, as long as a voice pushes through the static, Earth isn't completely gone. Not yet. There's a small ritual I keep before I open the mic. I wipe the dust from the console with the sleeve of my shirt, listen for the little click the relay makes when the circuit closes, and whisper the names of the people I lost into the cooling metal, like a prayer and a promise folded into one. Then I breathe and I speak. My name is Jonah Mercer. I used to have a life that fit into the spaces between paychecks and weekend barbecues, a small apartment with too many books, a desk job that smelled faintly of printer ink, and a daughter who laughed like wind chimes. Now my apartment is a hole in the wall behind a shuttered cafe, and my daughter's laugh is a name I say into the static, because saying it keeps her real. I broadcast from what used to be the university's communications wing, basement 3, cinder blocks and half a roof, spiderwebbed with cokes and tape. We used to teach here. Now I keep a signal alive. Survival in practice is a series of small, stubborn decisions stitched together by stubbornness. Water first. I collect condensation from whatever I can, tarps stretched over cold concrete at night, a rusted kettle warmed just enough to coax vapor. I've got an old ceramic filter I scavenged from a hospital wing, wrapped in cloth and charcoal. I boil because boiling is a ritual that lets me believe bacteria can be bargained with. Food is barter and memory. Canned peaches traded for a tank of diesel, a slab of jerky kept for birthdays. I ration everything like it is a promise I'm not allowed to break. Power is worship. The generator is my altar, and fuel is the sacrament. I pedal a stationary bicycle hooked to a converted alternator to top up the batteries and keep the transmitter warm through the long, restless nights. My hands are a map of grease and callus. I remember when I thought I'd never have to learn to solder. Now I can splice a coax in my sleep. I read frequency charts the way some people read prayers. There are windows in the day when the atmosphere is less forgiving to radio. Storms, solar flares, the kinds of interference that make a man swear and then laugh because there's nothing else to do. I keep at it anyway. I keep the clockwork of this place running because someone once kept me from giving up. People ask why I keep talking into a void. Aren't you just shouting into silence? They say, when they can coax a laugh out of me. The answer is shorter than the question, because silence is worse. Silence is the final theft. If the world is going to be taken from us, I will at least take one last thing back. The sound of a human voice insisting there was once a world that mattered. I speak for those who can't. I speak because the act of bearing witness to loss keeps me human. Also, more selfishly, because the radio keeps a ledger. I log coordinates when I hear them, names, the faint pattern of a new language built out of survival. If someone else is out there, if someone has found a well or a community, my voice is a breadcrumb. I am not a hero. I am a man who learned to live with the weight of guilt. There was a day I had to leave a car stopped on the interstate because the road ahead was already a furnace, and my daughter, Leela, was asleep in the back seat. I left with her handprint smudged on my sleeve. I thought I could carry her and the rest of the world, but the world has a way of slipping through the spaces between your fingers. I wake certain nights with the imprint of that hand on my chest and the memory of an engine cough that never caught. I replay the choice like a broken cassette, wearing down the edges until the guilt and the lesson are as faded as the photograph I still keep in a tin. Scars show where words cannot. There's a white line across my palm from a generator belt, an angry reminder of a winter when I kept the station running through a power surge that singed everything except my stubbornness. I talk about the weather like people talk about relatives, sarcastic, angry, occasionally affectionate. I mention the dust storms as if they were personalities I'd rather not invite over. But sometimes, in the quiet between broadcasts, I'll turn the lamp low, pull out the tin, and look at the photograph. Leela at 5, hair crooked from running, missing a tooth, and holding a blue balloon she insisted on keeping in the dark. The balloon is gone now, the photo smudged at the corners, but I trace her smile with my thumb because the human body needs ritual. We mark memory with touch, and that touch keeps us glued together. There are people who come and go. It's a bad mercy and a small miracle when someone sticks around. Ruth was the first. She wandered in after a scav run, ragged coat, eyes that knew how to calculate the angle of danger. We argued for 3 days over where to put the water barrel. She's practical. She has a laugh that sounds like a lock turning. She taught me to read wind patterns and when to trust an old map. Ben didn't make it through the winter. He was the one who taught me how to strip a solar panel down to its bones and piece it back together when the soldering iron had more personality than the components. He died fixing a door on a supply run. We buried him at dawn in a place where weeds have stopped being weeds and started being the only green left for miles. We said his name then, one by one, because that's what we know how to do now, mark life with a name. Trust is a currency scarcer than fuel. I learned early that smiles can be bait. Raiders move in patterns, loud, quick, and utterly without mercy. They come for fuel, for radios, for people who talk back. We keep windows covered and footprints messy so anyone tracking us can't tell which way we left. We practice a code. 3 short tones on the horn means danger. A long tone means safe. It is primitive, but it works. When someone answers the code, you hold your breath the length of a song and pray their voice is not another mask. My role here is not just survival, it's stewardship. I keep tapes, physical tapes and digital logs of voices I've recorded. They are an archive of small things. The name of a person who found a garden in the ruins of a botanical station. A child humming a tune that used to be a pop song. A farmer describing the taste of tomatoes after a year without them. These recordings are not for profit. They are for proof that people once insisted on being more than survivors. I call the collection the Ledger. It's a childish name, but the ledger matters. People can hear they were not alone. They can know they mattered to someone, even if that someone is only me in a basement with a stubborn generator. There's a scientific streak in me still. Before everything went sideways, I'd read papers and watched lectures. I kept those habits like a ritual. Now when I find an intact journal in a ruined lab, I pore over it like scripture. I teach myself things I once took for granted. How to coax a pump to pull out water that tastes like iron. How to recondition a battery cell with vinegar and patience. How to rig a storm shelter out of a collapsed subway alcove. The knowledge is practical, it saves lives, and it gives the long nights a shape. Learning is a way of refusing to be erased. Hope is a complicated thing. I carry it like an old radio battery. Sometimes it holds, sometimes it leaks away without warning. But it's hope that makes me catalog the names I hear and tally the odd coordinates called in over the ether. Twice, I've run into people who swore they had been told to head north to a place called Verdant. The name tastes like myth, like a song a father might hum to keep a child asleep. I don't know if such a place exists, but hope is not always about truth. Sometimes it's about navigation. The possibility of something better keeps me moving, keeps me soldering, keeps me calling the hours. My voice is hoarse from too many cold nights and too few proper meals. My jokes land funny because humor shifts in a world where the next day is a question. But there's a steadiness to the broadcast now that wasn't there in the beginning. It's not the polished cadence of an anchor. It's the rough voice of someone who has taught themselves to tell the truth, because the truth is the only currency that holds value right now. If someone is listening, I want them to know this. I am more afraid of forgetting than I am of dying. I am afraid that the names and the small details will be lost. How Leela liked to splash too close to the shore even when the warning signs were bright. How Ben hummed when he worked. How Ruth tucked a scrap of blue cloth into her pocket and called it lucky. I'm afraid that the world's texture, the small human things, will disappear under the tide of rot and ash. So I speak, I describe, I record, I remember. And when I'm done speaking, I sit back against the cool concrete and listen to the hum of the generator settle into a slower rhythm. The walls hold the sound like a shell keeps the ocean. I make plans for tomorrow's scavenging run, for the soldering I'll do at first light, for the tin of peaches I'll ration into 2 cups. These plans are humble, they are daily, they are enough. Because surviving the end of the world is not a single heroic act. It's 1,000 small mercies done without applause. It's keeping the radio on, even when your throat is dry. It's reading a name into the dark and believing it matters. It's continuing to be the kind of person who remembers to whisper the names into the metal before the mic clicks open. They called it the quiet year at first, an ironic joke the old broadcasters made when the first rains failed to come. Quiet, because the usual complaints and traffic and low-level din of civilization tapered into something thin and brittle. Quiet because the routine noises that stitched a life together vanished, the hiss of a bus, the chatter from a cafe, the distant rumble of a freight train. But quiet is not peace. Quiet is the crouch before a strike. The crisis that defines every breath now is simple and terrible. The water stopped coming back. It didn't go in a single monstrous event. It left piece by piece, like a thief slipping out through the back door. Spring after spring, the runoff was less. Snowpack in the high places, what used to be the planet's memory for water, thinned until the rivers were fed by memory alone. Lakes became mirrors of cracked mud. Aquifers, once thought immortal, dropped faster than anyone expected because we'd been pumping them dry for decades. Where fresh wells remained, the salt line crept inward like a slow tide, and old coastal aquifers turned brackish from the ocean's steady push. That loss of water rewired everything. Plants stopped doing the work they used to do, evaporating moisture from leaves, pulling humidity into the air, folding water into the sky's cycles. With less evapotranspiration, the local weather systems grew weaker and more capricious. The jet streams we'd relied on shifted their ancient lanes, and storm tracks found new paths or vanished entirely. The result was a world where seasonal cues lost their meaning. Heat waves that arrived earlier and for longer stretches, winters that shocked and froze without warning, and rain that came as a single furious pulse that did more harm than good because the soil could no longer drink it in. You learn those mechanisms because you have to. I teach them now like parables. The science is not poetry. It's the explanation for why a town that had always had a municipal well is now a crater dotted with desperate tents. Heat drives evaporation. Evaporation without plants means the soil bakes and turns to dust. Dust suspended in the atmosphere reflects light differently, dries more land, creates more dust. Positive feedbacks, scientists labeled them in papers no one reads anymore. Feedbacks mean runaway. Runaway means the systems we assumed were stable are not. The environmental collapse birthed other collapses: economic, social, moral. Food systems collapsed because irrigation systems relied on predictable sources. Without regular flows, fields failed. Crop diversity was lost as farmers concentrated on monocultures that could be scaled with machinery. Monocultures fail spectacularly under stress. Supply chains that once routed a tomato from greenhouse to city now fail at the points where fuel and logistics become unaffordable or impossible. Medicine ran short when factories closed or were repurposed. Hospitals kept running for the first wave, then most of them shuttered when the staff left to find food and water for their families. The old hierarchies, the ministries, the city councils, the corporations, flickered and died because bureaucracy cannot survive on empty tanks and burned-out servers. As infrastructure failed, people reorganized. Some formed enclaves, tiny, defensible communities centered around whatever resource someone had managed to secure. A shallow spring, a buried cistern, a derelict desalination plant that someone had rigged to work with a stolen diesel engine. Others went nomadic, drifting along with rumors and salvage maps, harvesting whatever the land yielded: metal, batteries, cables, seeds. And then there were the predators, raider bands who learned that the simplest way to gain resources was to take them by force. Raiders hunt fuel and radios because both let them move and control narrative. A community with a working transmitter can be a threat or a bargaining chip. I've seen all of it. My first real encounter with organized violence came on a road that used to be a highway. We were moving a cache of water drums wrapped in tarp. Ruth, Ben, and I in a battered van with the patched windows boarded up to keep the dust from killing the engine. A caravan of 3 pickup trucks cut us off and came like vultures, rifles already shouldered. They were not subtle. Their leader wore a mask fashioned from a road sign and had a laugh like frozen glass. We had a choice then: give them the water and probably our lives, fight for the drums and risk everything, or run and pray our engines started. I chose the last. We left with less dignity than water in our cans and more questions than answers. That is how survival hardens you. It forces you to prioritize the next heartbeat over the next moral lesson. Sometimes that priority is right. Sometimes it costs a life. We buried one of the neighbors the next week, a woman who'd preferred to stay and defend her storeroom. It still tangles my tongue when I say her name. Even without raiders, the weather itself became an enemy with teeth. Dust storms, walls of grit and glassy shards, began to travel further and with more frequency. They carry with them spore-like residues from burned materials, chemicals, decayed organics, the micro-ashes of houses and plastics. A dust storm is not just abrasion, it is chemical warfare by the weather. Engines seize, lungs scar, electronics corrode. You crawl into a shelter and pray your filters hold. The storms make navigation treacherous, erase landmarks, and bury the fragile caches of water you might have stashed for months. Wildfires turned from seasonal threats into perpetual infernos in some regions. Fires used to be limited by humidity and seasons. Now they eat into landscapes that have no longer been cooled by moisture. The fires generate their own weather, pyrocumulus clouds that throw lightning and spark new blazes miles ahead of the main front. Firebrands travel like seeds of destruction on hot winds. Once a town ignites, the surrounding area is complicit. There is nothing romantic about it. Fire is a hungry thing that leaves gray teeth in the hills. Food scarcity is not just about empty pantries, it's about a cultural amputation. We forget how to plant things that survive. Seeds rot in basements because we lacked knowledge of soil amendment and succession planting. Pests adapt faster than human plans. The cold snaps kill young saplings, the heat slides off and withers the tender shoots. People starve on the edge of abundance because they do not know how to coax life from poisoned earth. It makes me do what I do, carry instructions in my head, grit-gnawed pamphlets about soil, about companion planting, about harvesting dew. Practical knowledge becomes a lifeline. Resources are thin and degrading. Water is measured not in liters, but in minutes. How long will this canteen hold out if we are forced to walk? Food is allocated by portion and story. Who needs it? Who can farm if given a seed? Who must be kept alive because the enclave needs their skill? Fuel is a faith-based economy. We siphon from abandoned supply trucks, from half-burned gas stations, from the tanks of vehicles left to sink into the earth. There are ways to stretch fuel, slow burns, mixing in plant oils, driving in convoys at constant economy speeds. But every technique leaks risk. Store diesel in metal drums, rotated and kept off the ground. Use stabilizers if you can. Keep a siphon kit and a spare filter in a waterproof bag. That is practical. That is life. Power is another knife edge. Batteries lose capacity with deep discharge and high temperatures. We equalize cells whenever we can, discharge them fully, and then charge them on a slow trickle to prevent imbalance. I teach Ben's tricks like prayers. Tape a battery bank with neoprene to keep heat out. Charge during the morning before the sun pulls moisture out of the air. Run heavy loads in the hours when the generator is least taxed. The bicycle generator we cobbled together is not glamorous, but it is reliable. Pedal for an hour, and you can top a small battery enough to run the transmitter through a night. It keeps the signal alive and keeps us connected. Medicine and sanitation are incessant worries. Cuts that were once trivial can become fatal in the field. A stitchless wound in a world without antibiotics can fester into something that carries a person away in a week. Keep soap. Boil water. Keep a small first aid kit with sutures, antiseptic, and basic analgesics hidden in a waterproof tin. Learn to recognize the signs of systemic infection. Fever that keeps rising, a wound that darkens, breathing that shortens. You will not always be able to save everyone, but you can save some. Still, science is not just doom, it provides tactics. If you want water and you can't dig a well, harvest dew. Make dew condensers with black plastic over shallow pits, weighted at the center so vapor condenses on the underside and runs into a trough. Use a solar still to evaporate contaminated water and recapture pure condensate. Cut a hole in a tarp, place a container to collect the drip, weight the tarp in the center. Catch what the night gives you. At dawn, you will have a cup or two if you are patient and fastidious. Collect condensation from plants at dawn with a cloth and wring it into a container. Plant stems hold small but real rewards. Use ceramic or slow sand filters and charcoal layers. Boil if you can. When fuel is scarce, use SODIS, solar disinfection. Leave clear plastic bottles in full sun for 6 hours, longer if cloudy, to kill pathogens with UV. These are not glamorous solutions, but they buy days, and days add up. There are also social tactics. You cannot survive alone if you are weak in numbers. Groups allow specialization. Someone maintains the radio, someone tends the water catchments, someone scouts, but groups also create targets. We keep silent at night, we camouflage our light, we keep our exits clear. We practice signals, a code of knocks, a short musical pattern on the horn, the frequency scramble that identifies friend from foe. We maintain a ledger of names and directions, what community might be viable, what caravans are trustworthy. Rumors travel like rumors always have. A place called Verdant, a migratory community that claims to have revived an old greenhouse system. I have chased rumors and been burned. Yet rumor sometimes is the map to survival because the map makers are dead. The limitations shape every choice. Water scarcity limits mobility. You cannot walk 10 days without planning. Fuel limits outreach. You cannot promise to resupply if you cannot move. Food limits your workforce. You cannot spare hands for repair if every belly is hollow. Medical shortages mean every scrape is recalculated. The ledger I keep is a ledger of probabilities. Who can head out this week? What route is likely safe? Whether the radio battery will hold for 3 more nights. I tally these like a midwife counts breaths. This is the crisis. It is not the single headline of a drowned city or a burned town. It is 1,000 small failures compounded. It is the way the cold snaps kill more children after a warm spell because the plants have not had chance to root. The way a single raider convoy can dismantle months of rationing in an afternoon. The way a dust storm can smother the only patch of green in 30 miles in a day. And over everything is the arithmetic. We are borrowing time. The question is not whether we can survive tomorrow. The question is whether we can change how we live so that tomorrow keeps existing. That is why I speak on the radio and why I practice the rituals of saving knowledge. To tell someone how to make a still might save a life tonight. To teach how to stagger batteries might keep a transmitter awake through the next solar flare. To pass along the coordinates of a well might sustain a caravan. The crisis will not be solved by any one voice alone, but voices stitched together, voices that share information, that teach and warn and mourn, can bend the angle of fate just enough to keep a patch of green breathing in the dark. We are not fixed points. We are responses, we adapt, we fail, we try again, and we mark those tries into radio logs, into whispered instructions, into the ledger where names and tricks and small victories are kept like seeds in a tin. If you listen to the frequency at night, you might catch one of those entries, a voice teaching how to boil with a solar reflector, a woman laughing after finding 2 cans of peaches, a child asking what snow was like. Those are not relics. Their survival's small, stubborn, and urgent. They say crises arrive like tides. The first comes slow and you have time to adapt. The next comes faster and you learn you do not have time to adapt. The current wave moved through like that, fast enough to take what we'd patched together and leave ragged holes in it. We were down to 3 days of diesel. I count that sort of thing now the way priests counted beads. Not as a calendar, but as a set of obligations. 3 days of diesel meant 3 nights of transmitter life if we rationed the generator, 2 if the weather went foul and frequencies had to be warmed more often. It meant 2 supply runs, maybe 1 if the roads were blocked. It meant that any larger plan I'd been nursing in the back of my head, the idea that I could keep broadcasting daily and still set out to verify one of the rumors, had to be reduced to something practical. Practical in this world was brutal. Fuel had become prayer. We siphoned what we could from abandoned semis and buried car tanks with hand pumps. We mixed what we could with plant oil someone had pressed from an experiment with wild sunflowers 2 months earlier. It worked, but not cleanly. Engines coughed, then forgave us. The van we'd been using for longer hauls had a small, stubborn leak no one could find. You learn to live with small betrayals like that because the bigger betrayal, doing nothing, will kill you faster. Water was worse. The cistern we'd found months ago had been our miracle. Someone had built it, perhaps before the world stopped caring, perhaps during those early panic days. It gave us 2 months of steady water, and we rationed it down until cups tasted like gold. Then the ritual of theft arrived, an overnight theft of 3 drums by a group that knew how to cut a lock and move soundlessly. They took the fuel that had been earmarked for the next broadcast and left empty shells of our hopes. That theft shifted the geometry of every decision I made for the next week. People are not only thieves. Sometimes they are saviors, sometimes they are both. The radio carried rumors like seeds. Some took root, most did not. The name that started to bloom in whispers and half-hushed code on different frequencies was Verdant. It sounded like a myth. It sounded like a lie. It tasted like the sort of promise people made when they were dying of thirst and needed to pinch themselves awake. Verdant, people said it was a place where someone had resurrected an old greenhouse system. They said automated pumps had been repaired from a desal plant and were running on a jury-rigged mix of solar and old battery banks. They said there was a community that had learned to compost like madmen, to lay a soil with ash and coffee grounds until tomatoes grew as if by sin. They said children played in real dirt. The word, verdant, made grown men whisper in the same voice you'd use to say a name of a lost lover. It's the sort of rumor that both sustains and destroys a community because it invites hope and draws predators like moths to flame. Ruth heard the rumor on a static-ridden channel while we were rotating the batteries at dawn. She folded the note into her palm like it was a talisman. Ben would have laughed. Ben would have said we were chasing stories. Ben is gone. Without him, the joke tastes brittle. Could be miles off, I said. Could be another caravan inventing names to lure charity. Or it's real, Ruth said, and someone else is eating green beans in a world of dust. Her voice folded around the idea like someone wrapping a blanket tighter. That's when the fracture grew. Trust, always the thin glass we walk on, began to tremble. We considered staying. There is a moral gravity in a broadcast. Someone has to be the ear for the lost. Leaving the transmitter unmanned felt like desertion. But staying meant slow death. We were running out of food. The canned peaches I'd hidden in a tin were already 2 bites gone. The rest was rationed for barter, because sometimes a can opens a gate to fuel or a map or a set of hands you need. Staying meant someone else would have to shoulder the generator duty while the others searched. That someone else would be risking a transmitter for a chance at Verdant. It's a small calculus, but in a world where one small equation can decide lives, math tastes like metal. We did something we had practiced like a ritual. We called the frequency and made a ledger entry. If someone hears this, I said into the mic, voice steady because steadiness is a weapon, we leave at dawn, 2 go, 1 stays. If the transmitter falls silent for more than 3 nights, assume we've been taken or worse. Leave the beacon sequence for emergency only. We set the code. Ruth and I made sure our steps were planned: route, water caches, spare filters, a bypass around the old freeway where raiders like to wait. Ben would have double-checked the alternator, but Ben is gone and his ghost sat in the back seat with the smell of solder and oil. Then the first raid happened. They came like an idea that had been practiced. 3 trucks, headlights masked, movement practiced in silence. They hit a caravan 2 days west of us and then followed the tracks back toward the main road where people sometimes scavenged. We heard them on the scanner, voices with a clipped cadence, laughter like breaking glass. We were in the middle of ration counting when the horn sounded, 3 short tones, then a long one, the pattern for danger. My chest clogged like a gutter in rain. We moved fast. Ruth hid the transmitter behind a false wall we'd built out of old books and insulation. We made sure the antenna could be taken down in under a minute, and the generator could be spliced to the bike power in an emergency. We gathered the basic: water bottles, the silvered tin of peaches, a small med kit, a map folded to the corner with the encampments we trusted marked like constellations. We left a note in the ledger, taped to the console. Raiders en route, leaving for Verdant. If you can't follow, burn the logs and go west. Those who stayed behind did not ask why. They did not debate. They wrote names in small ink and kissed weathered foreheads. They took solace in routines that, in a place like this, pass as prayers. We drove at night. Travel at night is economy. You conserve water when the air is cooler, and you use the shadows rather than engines. We kept lights low, headlights masked with torn fabric, speaking only when necessary. The world at night is different, colder, yes, but quieter in a way that sharpens other sounds. A distant animal cry, the sound of some survivor's dog, maybe, feels like a shout. On the second night, we came across a semi-buried highway rest stop where a small group had holed up, their tents made from truck tarpaulins and shopping carts. At first, we thought they were scavengers like us. Their faces were drawn, their eyes sparkled with a hunger that was part hunger and part calculation. They called themselves the cartographers, trifling with maps and trading routes like men running lotteries. They said they'd heard Verdant too and had been tracking a different set of coordinates. Their leader, an older man with a missing tooth and a ring of tattoos that looked like road maps, offered to share information in exchange for fuel. Barter looks like kindness until you realize what is being traded. I watched Ruth as the cartographer man spoke. She considered the offer the way she considered a used soldering iron, careful at first, then pragmatic. In the end, we traded a can of peaches and a sliver of diesel for a set of coordinates and a whispered warning. Not all who call themselves Verdant are saviors. Many take the name to draw survivors in. What that meant, we did not know. What we did know was that human stories repeat. Hope attracts predators, and predators dress in the clothes of salvation. There were other frictions. Trust, in our caravan, became a slippery currency. A young woman named Lael, who'd been traveling with us for a week, was restless. She kept staring at the map as if the lines were living things. On a scouting run, she took a side path that wasn't on our map and met a man who sold her a small packet of seeds. He called them resurrection beans. She took them as if they were a sacrament. When I asked where she'd found them, she lied. The lie was small, the size of a coin, but every small coin in this world adds up. We made camp under a ruined billboard advertising a long-ago summer festival. Fire was a problem. We could not let it sing too loudly, but we needed its warmth. Someone kept watch. Someone else turned the generator down to trickle charge the batteries. We ate in shifts. Talk grew short and sometimes sharp. Each word measured against what it might cost. And the weather, God, the weather. A storm rolled in like a cinder in the throat. It wasn't the soft rain we used to know. It came as a wall of heat, dense and humming, and when it hit, it brought a slurry of microscopic ash that felt like being breathed through glass. Filters choked. Our sleeves were gray with dust. The van's engines stuttered and refused to start until Ruth needed its carburetor like a priest blessing a child. We lost half a day trying to coax the vehicle back to life. That delay cost us time, and it cost us safety. By the time we reached the coordinates the cartographers had given, the map led to an empty factory ground, Greenhouses collapsed into a skeleton of glass and rust. There was a pump, a rusted thing that still hummed like the memory of water, but it was dry. Marks on the concrete suggested someone had been there recently, a footprint, a smudge of oil. Someone had been watching these coordinates like a flittering lantern. We found a scrap of paper tucked beneath a loose stone, a hand-drawn map pointing deeper north with a hastily written note. Verdant moved. Follow the riverbed past the collapsed mill, beware the red trucks. The note was a compass and a blade. It suggested movement and danger at the same time. Hope again, being both map and trap. Ruth wanted to push on. Lael wanted to go home. I wanted both and neither. The ledger I'd left in the transmitter had my voice scrawled across it in a way that felt like confession. If I die, remember the names. If you follow the rumor, mark your route. The caravan decided to travel by foot for a stretch, leaving the van 2 miles behind in a shallow ravine where it could be defended if we were forced to return. Walking is an intimacy with the land. Each step reveals drainage ditches, old fences, the carcasses of small towns. You learn to read the bones. You learn to note the places where water once pooled, now lined with salt. You learn how desperation smells. You learn how quickly a small group can become noise in a world that hunts silence. That is the crucible of rising action. Pressure increases, choices narrow, and every small mistake becomes a cliff. We were walking toward Verdant, toward a promise, toward a potential salvation. We were also walking toward whatever waited at the end of that rumor, maybe green gardens and salt-free wells, maybe an ambush, maybe nothing at all. And through it all I kept the transmitter in my head like a prayer. If I leave, who will keep speaking? If I stay, who will seek the water that might feed the radio and the lives that depend on it? The ledger balance tipped like a scale with missing weights. The tension set in externally and internally in the cracked road and the red trucks on the horizon, internally in the small, private bargains I made with myself, what truth I would tell if the raiders caught me, how I would barter my last secret seed, whether I would leave Lael at the roadside if she slowed us. We moved with urgency and suspicion. The night before our final push, there was a sound that slackened us into silence. A radio burst on a nearby frequency, brief and distorted, and a voice I half recognized calling a name I had recorded months ago in a ledger entry. Ruth, are you there? It was weak and cut off by static, but the cadence was real. It meant someone was alive and somewhere near. We looked at each other like men who had seen a mirage. The rumor was not only in the south, and it was not only in the mouths of hopeful strangers. Someone else had heard the same rumor and had answered it, or someone had used the name to bait men like us. We could follow the call. We could ignore and hope the transmitter would live without us. We could split the party, leaving one to guard the transmitters, the other to follow the faint voice on the air. I found my voice steady in the dark as I spoke into my palm, into the tin photograph of Leela, and into the radio. Tomorrow, I said, we go north along the riverbed. We move light. If the red trucks appear, scatter on the third horn and head southeast. Keep the ledger up to date. If you are listening and have a safe shelter, answer on 7.9.3. Use 3 short and 2 long tones. Hope is an act of protocol in a dying world. So is fear. So is leaving. We packed, checked, and sealed our tins. We did not sleep. We waited for sunrise with our breath held, ears tuned to the world's thin noises. A bird's distant rattle, the soft click of a lone generator in the far-off dark, the stutter of a truck engine on a broken road that might be a friend or an enemy. The rising action closed around us like the dust storms we'd learned to fear. The harder the wind, the more impossible it felt to see what lay ahead. But we went anyway. Because when a place called Verdant starts to feel like your only answer, you do not turn back for comfort. You turn forward into the storm. And the storm is coming faster than I can count the beads of the diesel left in our drums. They said Verdant would be a myth until the day we saw the green. For weeks, the word had been an ache inside my mouth, a taste of something I hadn't had the right to crave. When the light slid over the ridge and the valley opened up, when the valley pushed itself like a living thing into the gray world, I felt something break open inside me I had been holding together with tape and prayer. There were vines. Real vines, heavy with something that could have been fruit if I hadn't blinked too fast. Rows of glass domes stitched together with patched metal and clear plastic, sweating with condensation. A pump tower, scarred and repainted, hummed with the low confidence of a thing that had been coaxed back from death. Children, real children, ran a game that used the word mud as a punchline. I had dreamed of mud and never known it would look like gold. We approached cautious, because caution is habit. We walked into the valley on foot until the false comforts of the road fell away. The air there tasted different, cooler, wetter, with a soft green smell that almost made me weep. We crossed a narrow bridge over a shallow stream that actually flowed, not a trickle, but a steady, singing line of water that slid over stones like a thin promise. Lael put her hand into the stream and did not pull it back for a long time. Ruth laughed until she cried. I only stood and let the sound of water fill my ears like a hymn I had forgotten. Then men in dark shirts found us. They were not the feral raiders whose faces we'd learned to read in the dim. These men wore badges and carried themselves with the sort of practiced calm you give people who expect to be obeyed. A woman stepped forward with a clipboard and a voice that sounded like an anchor, not a radio voice, but a manager's voice. She called herself Harper. Her smile was a contract. "We're glad to see you," Harper said. "You're tired, you're hungry, we can help, but we run on rules." Her rules were reasonable at first. Take showers, attend crop rotations, keep the greenhouse sealed after sundown. Then the price appeared like a watermark on paper. No external transmitters, no unregulated signals. No maps of the valley shared outside unless authorized. No strangers brought in without vetting. The town was defensive by design. It had learned that a community is a target if it is too easy to find. Which is to say, Harper's Verdant survived by policy as much as by pump. "You mean you silence people," I said. "We keep the signal to prevent the red trucks from homing in," Harper answered. "The old technology makes hunting easier for those who use it. We cannot risk being wiped because someone keeps shouting coordinates into the ether. We do not ask for people to die. We ask for discipline." I thought of the ledger, a tin, battered, full of names and voices and the little data points that made people real again. I thought of the children who had never known a city and called this place home. I thought of the people I'd left behind to keep the transmitter warm. I thought of Leela's handprint smudged on the sleeve of a shirt that must have been softer once. "Hand over the transmitter," Harper said, "and your logs. We'll vet everything. We'll make sure no one broadcasts the valley." Ruth's face hardened like an old coin. She stepped forward, hands ready for negotiation. "We can trade skills. Ben did wiring, I know pumps. We can help keep this place alive. But we won't hand over what we cannot keep private." "You mean the radio?" Harper asked. "If you can't agree, if you keep transmitting, then you make us a target. We will defend this valley. We will defend these children. We will do whatever it takes." Her voice carried the weight of a decision already made. She was the sort of leader who had learned to make choices that left fewer variables for later. It's practical, it's lethal. The ledger felt heavy in my coat, like a stone that remembered my daughter's laugh. The ledger was more than names. It was proof that we had existed on purpose, not by accident. If I handed it over, would the names be locked away? Would they be used to trade for labor or bartered to other groups? Or would they be archived and protected? The moral calculus here could have been a theorem. Protect the valley by sacrificing the voice, or keep the voice and risk the valley being found by people who kill for diesel and land. Neither option gave peace. Then the sky changed. We'd been bargaining in the shade of a collapsed service gantry when the first sheets of dust arrived, a distant ribcage of wind that made the leaves shiver. It came quicker than the air said it would, like the world woke and realized its own appetite. Harper looked up the way everyone did, a human who had not promised to be caught off guard. One of her men reached for a long-range scanner and cursed. The screen showed movement on the ridge, and then the red blink of headlights. The trucks, 3 at first, then 5, then a string that looked like a comb. The red trucks, the hunters. Harper's voice lost the brochure cadence. "We have to follow protocol," she said. "We keep the gates closed. We defend. If your transmitter is outside, we will destroy it. We will not let it call them to our door. There it was. The protocol, silence over shelter. If she destroyed the transmitter, she could save their children. If she didn't, she could be struck. If I refused, the red trucks might track us through my signal to the valley. If I complied, I might doom every other lonely voice out in the dark. I felt Leela's hand press into my memory like a warm coin. I thought of those who had never had a listener, those who had whispered into static already and had no more pages to turn. The ledger pulsed in my pocket with the names I had written, names I had promised the world I would not let go. You have to choose, Ruth said, voice small. I had to choose. I thought of one brutal truth I had learned while radioing into the void. Information is both armor and arrow. You can keep it secret to protect a person. You can also fling it wide to offer everyone a chance. People die when secrets are kept. People die when proclamations are made. The balance was a razor. I made a plan in the time it takes a man to decide whether to cross a bridge and call it courage. I would do both. I would not hand over the ledger. I would not give them the transmitter as a functioning tool. I would do the one reckless thing the world still allowed me. I would speak. Give me 5 minutes, I said. Ruth's eyes widened. Harper's hand hovered near a holster. The red trucks became a visual stain on the ridge, the way you see an animal track and know it will find the scent trail. Do it fast, Harper said. Make it quick. I dug the transmitter from its hiding place, a false wall built out of old textbooks and a strip of salvaged insulation. My hands shook like fists that had forgotten how to be steady. I set it on the concrete slab and flipped the switch. The batteries protested, the generator coughed, then settled. For a breath, I felt like a priest. I could have whispered coordinates in a coded way, but Harper had warned that any clear signal would be homed. I could have stayed silent and traded the transmitter for safety. Instead, I did something that belongs to men who have nothing left to lose and a ledger too heavy to forget. I called a frequency, opened the mic, and spoke. This is Jonah Mercer, I said, voice raw but measured. The microphone ate my words and pushed them out over the valley like a stone skipping water. To anyone listening, there is a community at coordinates 43.2 by 87.6. A valley, greenhouses, a pump tower. They call themselves Verdant. They will offer shelter under terms. If you are coming, come with caution. Use the riverbed route to the west. Avoid the freeway. If you can, bring not only tools and seeds, bring knowledge. Seed saving, soil layering, battery maintenance. If you can, bring more than a gun. I did not spell out everything I could have. I chose to share enough so that someone in desperate need might find them and that the knowledge I carried would not be hoarded by a single gate. I spoke the names from my ledger, small offerings I had read aloud over the years to keep the dead from evaporating. This is for Leela, this is for Ben, this is for Ruth, for the ones who taught me to solder. I read the names, and the voice carried them into the valley air and over the ridges where the red trucks might catch them. Harper's men cursed. The men in the red trucks slowed, antennas turning as if the sound were a magnet. I heard a roar in the distance, and then the thud of engines getting closer. The dirt on the air shifted as if a giant exhaled. You fool, Harper shouted. Do you see what you've done? I saw the truth in her face. Horror, betrayal, the calculation that a broadcast could invite an army. I also saw the crack in her authority where her community's safety was a glass she had to hold steady against an oncoming storm. She had chosen secrecy to survive. I had chosen sharing to keep the ledger alive. You had to know there might be hunters, I said. I couldn't hand names over to a ledger that might be pried open behind a gate. Ruth grabbed my sleeve. Jonah, the children, I know, I said. I know. There was no glory in the choice, only a fact. I had decided that survival could not become ownership of the future. If Verdant was to be a refuge, it had to be available to those who needed it, not only those who could pass a vetting interview. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I was dangerous. Maybe I had already damned us all. The red trucks appeared on the ridge like teeth. They cut across the skyline, engines punching up dust that bloomed in the valley air like a second storm. The children screamed and were ordered inside. Harper barked commands. Her men moved with the lethal grace of trained defenders. We had seconds to act. I did one more thing before the chaos swallowed us. I took the ledger, my hands slick with the weight of names, and I jammed it into a hollow beneath the radio cabinet. Then I set the transmitter's final function, a timed detonation of circuitry that would fry the unit if the wrong hands tried to pull it outside the dome, a kill switch Ben had taught me once long ago. It was an ugly, last resort tactic, but in the valley I had learned to make ugly things work for good. Then I stepped back and did what I had always done. I put words into the air. Stay alive, I said to anyone listening. Find a patch of green where you can. If you can't, plant a seed somewhere, anywhere. Mark the place for others. We will watch the sky for you. Sirens began to wail, Verdant's internal alarm. The red trucks cut toward the bridge. The valley doors clanged shut with a sound that felt like a heart latching closed around air. We ran for cover while the first of the red trucks ripped through the outer fence like a knife through fabric. Bullets scudded into the dirt and lofted pebbles into the air. The storm of dust and metal merged into a single, terrible noise. I thought of Leela's missing tooth and the way she used to hold balloons. I thought of the ledger tucked under the cabinet and the names rising like a prayer into the air which might give the world a way out. I do not know if my voice saved anyone that day. I do not know if the coordinates I spoke reached a mother with a child in her arms on the far side of a burnt plain. I only know what I chose. To break the silence for the chance that another voice might find the valley without being screened by someone who decided who had the right to live. The valley turned into a battlefield that night. Children were put behind reinforced panels. Men and women who had once been civil servants with paper in our hands now handled rifles with hands that trembled. Dust strung our eyes. The generator I had melted with the kill switch smoked a last chromed breath and died. We were inside a living thing that could guard itself. Outside, the trucks circled like a dark tide. When the guns stopped and the quiet settled, I sat on a crate and opened my palm. The tin photograph of Leela was warm from my body heat. I pressed the edge of it to my lips like a benediction. I had spoken, and I had burned a bridge. I had chosen both hope and risk in the same breath. Hope has a terrible cost sometimes. The ledger was hidden, the transmitter ruined. The valley had been found. Whether it would stand or fall, I could not say. The turning point was not the green we had reached, but the line I had crossed with my voice. From guardian of a small beacon to someone who would risk a whole place to keep names alive. The storm had come. The decision had snapped shut. And in the quiet that followed the gunfire, I realized the real test was not whether we survived the night, but what kind of people we became after we'd had to decide. A thin, reluctant dawn came after the night. The valley learned how loud the world could be. The air tasted of copper and wet soil, an odd and stubborn scent after so much ash, and for a handful of breaths, I let myself believe the worst was over. Then I walked outside. The fence was a torn thing, metal spread like ribs. The outer greenhouses were scarred, panes cracked, some frames twisted where armor had punched through. Inside, beds were trampled, and seedlings flattened like prayers blown out. There were people I'd learned to recognize by gait and laugh who did not stand by the pumps anymore. Children who had been chasing mud the day before were wrapped in blankets, strangely silent. The defenders, Harper's people, moved with slow, professional exhaustion. Some of them were injured. Some of them had fingers bandaged where a splintered plank or a ricochet had kissed them. Someone was carrying a box of jars with preserved tomatoes, a small, absurd prize. They had held. That was the first blunt fact. The red trucks had circled the valley like angry beasts and punched the place, but they hadn't taken it. Harper's people had used what they had: reinforced doors, practiced fields of fire, a ring of sharpened rebar that tore up a truck tire like paper. A couple of the red trucks had burned. Others had retreated when the cost outweighed the hoped-for gain. There were fewer hunters the next day. Whether they were truly gone or merely licking wounds in the Badlands, I do not know. But victory tasted of metal and loss. We lost people, not as many as a full rout might have taken, but enough names to make the ledger feel like an open wound. In the early light, Ruth and I went through the list, reading each name aloud and then aloud again, the cadence of it making grief into ritual. We buried the dead near the orchard where the soil was richest. We wrapped simple stones around them and planted seeds on top, because that felt right, burying sorrow with the promise of something green. Verdant's leadership had choices to make after the battle, choices that were not about survival, but about what survival would cost. Harper's eyes were tired in a way I recognized. Surviving becomes decisions you make that other people must live with. For a while, she had been unbending. The attack hardened her belief in lockdown and secrecy. Then she had seen the children and the jars, and the way Ruth refused to keep silent about a man she had loved, whose name I had read into the air. After a long night of arguing and watching, she softened just enough to be dangerous. She offered us shelter and a place to work. "You saved certain lives with your call," she said bluntly once, as if the truth could be measured and handed out. "People came because of what you said. Others came because of hunters looking for what you said. This is the cost. If you stay, you help us build defenses and teach people how to keep soil alive. If you leave, you take your ledger and your knowledge and walk the road with it. We'll not stop you." Her concession was not absolution. It was an accounting. I refused the easy answer of staying in sanctuary without responsibility. I could have folded into the valley, taught wiring, helped shore up the generators, dug trenches for better water catchment. It would have been sensible. But the ledger, my ledger, our ledger, sat like a coal against my ribs. I had hidden it under the radio cabinet the night I'd burned the transmitter. The machine no longer functioned. Someone had lifted a soldering iron to its innards and made sure it would not be revived without a shop that didn't exist. My killing of that tool was a promise and a wound. I decided, slowly and with the kind of clarity that comes from too many sleepless nights, to split my duty. I would stay long enough to teach a few basic things: solar cell maintenance, slow sand filtration, how to sequence a crop rotation, and then I would leave. The ledger would not be handed over to a gate, not because I wished to defy Harper, but because I believed names should not be held as bargaining chips. If Verdant was to be an island of refuge, I wanted it to be reachable by those who needed it, not only by those who could be vetted and cross-examined. That belief had already cost us blood. It might cost more. In the days that followed the attack, valleys of people came, some answering my broadcast, some following other rumors, some simply wandering and asking for water. A handful of ragged travelers appeared with the exact coordinates I had spoken into the night. They arrived with muddy shoes and empty canteens and stories of long walks across baked rivers. Eyes brightened at the sight of green. Hands curled around offered loaves like prayers. But among those who came were thin men with restless gazes, scouts of the kind who might lead others. The valley tightened its routine, vetting procedures became more thorough, sentries were posted farther out, routes to the riverbed were disguised and shifted daily. The ledger stayed where I had hidden it. At night I would take it out, dust it, run my fingers over the names, and copy a few onto seed packets or into strips of paper that I buried here and there in the garden beds. I taught a handful of people to do the same, to carve names into clay tags and tuck them into jars of preserved seeds. If anything happens to the ledger, I told them, find the seeds. Names travel better under dirt. I began to accept a new role that felt like a compromise between my instincts. I would be a teacher and a courier of small physical memories. I would not be a loud signal. Where the transmitter had been a beacon, I would be a gardener. Where my voice had once stitched strangers into a ledger, my hands would sow names into packets of seeds and into the roots of trees. It was a quieter work, but perhaps quieter work was what the world now valued. Nature in the valley kept doing what it could with the help humans could give. Compost piles steamed, worms gnawed through trash and turned it into soil. Mulch held moisture like a secret. Biochar blackened bits of wood buried under beds, improved structure and held nutrients. The greenhouse systems, old technology patched by human patience, kept humidity high and kept seedlings alive. Here science looked less like theory and more like devotion. The pumps hummed with jury-rigged generators, some connected to solar arrays, some to hand-cranked alternators. Children learned to drum compost into beds and to measure pH with improvised strips of stained paper. There was no miracle, only patient application. Still, the world beyond Verdant's ring remained a larger storm. Dust storms still rolled like cinder waves across plains. The ocean level continued to muscle inland in spots, migration lines that had once been highways turned into ragged trails. We were not curing climate collapse. We were carving out patches in its shadow, but those patches mattered. They were testaments to a stubborn species. Inside me, the change was quieter but deep. The man who had once believed his voice could be the ledger's sole guardian learned to value multiplicity. Names, I learned, should be redundantly stored. In clay, in seeds, in the muscle memory of people who could be asked to repeat them aloud. I stopped believing that one machine or one man could hold a truth single-handed. I stopped believing I could carry redemption in my pocket. Redemption, if it existed at all, was distributed work. Guilt did not leave me. It arranged itself differently. It no longer sat like a single stone. It spread like mortar between bricks. Some nights I lay awake and went through the names of those we had lost during the raid, and I wondered if my call had been the incitement that cost them breath. I had given information into the open air. Some had taken shelter because of it, others had been drawn into harm's way. There is a cruelty in being able to offer a thing that can be used for both salvation and destruction. I could not unmake that cruelty, so I learned to answer for it. The ledger remained secret, but fragments of its contents now migrated. I taught seed-saving classes to anyone who would listen. We turned luggage into memory. A name written on the underside of a mason jar, a child's drawing pressed into a seed packet. We taught the children to sing names into the soil when they planted. It felt like small magic, and maybe it was. The decision to leave Verdant later that spring was neither triumphant nor tragic. I left with a bag of preserved seeds, a worn tin photograph of Leela, and a mouthful of instructions memorized so I could teach them in other places. How to make a solar still, how to build a slow sand filter, how to compost with ash and manure to rebuild carbon. I left some people with instructions on how to repair a transmitter should they ever decide to use it again in a safer way. I also left a list of names, copied and dispersed into jars and tags hidden across the gardens. As I walked away, I looked back and saw young saplings already sprouting where we'd buried names and seeds. The site strung in the best possible way. It meant living things had taken root with our memories, so what was the outcome of my decision? Both blessing and burden. The valley survived the night, but paid in blood and vigilance. My broadcast had brought both refugees and danger. My choices had no tidy finish. I had traded a tool for a trust, a broken transmitter for the continued existence of a distributed memory. I had not kept everyone safe. I had not made the world kinder, but I had preserved a practice, the act of naming, of planting a life with a name tied to it. If there is a lesson in the ashes, it is this. When the world collapses, you learn to make altars out of small things. Soil becomes prayer, seeds become scripture, names become anchors. We cannot, any of us, demand the whole planet bend back into its old skin. We can only make pockets of repair and teach others to do the same. And maybe, over generations, those pockets stitch into a patchwork that fights erosion one stubborn root at a time. I still sometimes dream of Leela's laugh. I still whisper names into the tin before I pack it away for another road. I still carry guilt like a coin in my pocket, cold and familiar. But I also carry a new sort of hope, smaller and more practical, that the ledger will not die with me because it has been copied into so many places that killing it would take more than a single night's fire. That is the quiet victory. The world outside continues to be hungry and dangerous. The storms still rage. But there are places, thin, stubborn places, where green reasserts itself, piece by piece, hand by hand. Those places will not save the planet alone. They will, however, save some people. And saving some people is how the long story keeps continuing. Tonight, as I walk under a sky that is still not blue, but less fierce than it once was, I plan the next ledger copy. I will teach a caravan to carry seeds and names and the knowledge to make water from nothing. I will whisper instructions into a child who will remember them as stories. That is my work now. To make sure names outlive broadcast frequencies, that memory lives in jars and roots and songs, and that when the world asks for witnesses, we make more of them than one single, fragile voice could ever be. There's a small thing I do now when the day closes. I take the tin with Leela's photograph out, warm it between my palms, and whisper a name into the metal. It is not a prayer so much as a promise to remember, to keep, to pass along. The habit steadies me. It is the same motion I used to make before I spoke into the mic, only quieter now. The world taught me the cost of loudness. It taught me that some things survive better when buried and watered slowly. After Verdant, the ledger lives in pieces. Clay tags, seed packets, a strip of paper rolled into a jar and buried under the compost heap. Every name is copied and scattered so that no one night of fire can take them all. I travel with some of those jars in a canvas satchel across roads that are more rumor than root. I teach people to make dew traps from black plastic, to build slow sand filters from gravel and charcoal, to press compost into beds with hands that ache. I teach them to say names when they plant, because the act of naming ties memory to the living. Hope is not grand, it is small and practical. It looks like a hand that knows how to splice wire. It smells like compost. It tastes like the first tomato none of us expected to save. It is the moment a child finds a worm and laughs instead of screaming. It is not a headline, it is a slow record of days kept. And yet hope is fragile. It can be broken by a single decision, a single broadcast, a single convoy of red trucks. I learned that in the valley when I chose to read names aloud instead of turning them over to a gate. That choice saved some and endangered others. The ledger grew, not smaller, but diffused, because owning a name felt wrong when survival could be bartered. So we distributed our memories like seeds, because seeds survive when spread. I am changed. Once, the radio was all I had. The transmitter in the university basement was my altar. I would sit by it and count the hours with a maniac's devotion. After Verdant, the big transmitter is gone, fried, sacrificed, a bitter offering to stop hunters. I miss its steady hum, but losing it taught me a vital thing. Voices are more than machines. Voices can live in jars, in dirt, in people who remember how to graft and how to sing a name to a sprout. I carry redundancy now, knowledge in heads, names in clay, instructions on my lips. I am less the voice in the void, and more the one who teaches others to speak for themselves. The earth around us does not reset overnight. There are still storms that carve the air into raw sheets, still heat waves that blister the soil into glass. The oceans take, and coastlines are arguments shouted into the surf, but pockets of repair exist like small lamps in the dark. Verdant is one such lamp, scarred, guarded, imperfect, but alive. There are other lamps too, gardens in basements, rooftop beds, a network of people who trade seeds and soldering tips. We are not healing the planet. That work will take generations and 1,000 stubborn hands. What we are doing is making places where human life can continue so that human life will be there to try the larger repairs later. Guilt is a companion that has not left me. Some nights it crowds the room. Sometimes it sits like a patient animal waiting for the smallest kindness. I replay moments and hear the echoes, the call I made that night, the names I read, the trucks that came. I do not pretend I was right in everything. I know my choices made outcomes, and not all of them were good. I keep the ledger heavy in my thoughts as penance and as reminder. It teaches me to be humble in my next decisions. There are practical things I say now when I meet strangers. They are small and gritty, not poetic. Collect dew. Stretch black plastic over a shallow pit, wait the center, collect the drip at dawn. Build a small solar still if the water is salty, a bowl in the center of a shallow pit, plastic over the top, wait it so condensation runs into the bowl. It gives you cups. Charcoal in the soil holds nutrients. Make biochar where you can, burn bits of wood low and bury it. Save seeds in jars with silica or ash. Mark them with clay tags and a name. Names and seeds travel better together. When you travel, do so light and in the cool of night. Hide your light. If you must make noise, make it coded, 3 short, 2 long. They are small rules, eaten up by exhaustion and cunning, but they hold people alive while bigger fixes are thought through. There is a tenderness in the way people adapt. I met a woman last month near an old subway shaft who had turned 3 carts into a mobile greenhouse. She'd trained 2 children to water seedlings with a syringe because every drop counted. She named each tray after someone she'd lost. When I asked why, she shrugged like a person telling a familiar story. Names, she said, are how we keep the past from vanishing. They tell the future who belongs. So my final message is simple and practical and stubborn. Keep naming, keep planting. Teach one person a skill that might save a life. Share what you know, even if you think it's small. A single piece of knowledge, how to filter water, how to nurture a seedling, how to mend a panel, can ripple outward and save people you will never meet. Do not think you must be a hero. You must only be useful. In a world unmade, usefulness is a kind of love. Usefulness is food for the future. Usefulness means passing on not just seeds, but the names that anchor them to memory. If you are listening and you are alone, find a place to hide a jar. Put a name in it, your name, a name you carry, the name of a place. Bury it where someone might someday find it and graft that memory into a new life. If you have a child, teach them to plant and to sing the names into the soil. If you have tools, teach someone how to fix a wire. If you have fuel, trade it for knowledge, not for a promise that can be broken. I don't know what waits beyond the next ridge. I do not know if peace will be wide again in my lifetime. What I do know is this: small acts pile up like stones until you can build something that looks a little like shelter. We are a species of stubborn hands. We will keep trying. Tonight, I will put the tin back into my satchel, fold a clay tag with a new name into a seed packet, and walk toward the next light. I will teach someone to solder, and I will teach a child to press a name into soft clay. I will keep the record redundant and the stories shareable. That is my way to keep the ledger alive without a single loud voice to guard it. So for whoever is listening, if you are listening, here is my final, small request. Stay alive, keep a name, plant a seed, teach someone else how to make water from nothing. Do these things, and you give the future a fighting chance. This is Jonah Mercer. I am not on the big airwaves anymore. I am on the road, with seeds and names and the knowledge that we cannot carry the whole world alone. We can, however, carry one another across a dark night. Stay human, keep telling names, keep planting.